guilty though proven innocent. So Schaefer mostly stayed inside his office with the door closed, sometimes locked. He performed his few remaining duties with a growing sense of irritation and frustration, and a sense of the absurd. It was driving him mad to be trapped like this, to be a pathetic spectacle for the embassy staff. He idly played with his computer and waited for the game of the Four Horsemen to resume, but the other players had cut him off. They insisted that it was too dangerous to play, even to communicate, and not one of them understood why this was the perfect time to play. Schaefer stared out onto Massachusetts Avenue for interminably long stretches during the day. He listened to call-in talk shows on the radio. He was getting angrier and angrier. He needed to play. Someone was knocking on the door of his office. He turned his head sharply and felt a spike of pain in the back of his neck. The phone had begun to ring. He picked up and heard the temp he'd been assigned. Ms. Wynne Hammerman was on the intercom.
"Mr. Andrew Jones is here to see you," she said.
Andrew Jones? Schaefer was shocked. Jones was a hot-shit director from the security service in London. Schaefer hadn't known he was in Washington. What the hell was this visit about? Andrew Jones was a high-level, very tough prick who wouldn't just drop by for tea and biscuits. Mustn't keep him waiting too long. Jones was standing there, and he looked impatient, almost furious. What was this about? His steely blue eyes were cold and hard. His face was as rigid as that of an English soldier posted in Belfast. In contrast, his brilliant red hair and moustache made him look benign, almost jolly. He was called Andrew the Red, back in London. "Let's go inside your office, shall we? Shut the door behind you," Jones said in a low but commanding voice. Schaefer was just getting past his initial surprise, but he was also starting to lose it. Who did this pompous arsehole think he was to come barging into his office like this? By what right was he here? How dare he, the toad, the glorified lackey from London? "You can sit down, Schaefer," Jones said. Another imperious command. "I'll be brief and to the point." "Of course," Schaefer answered. He remained standing. "Please do be brief and get to the point. I'm sure we're both busy." Jones lit up a cigarette, took a long puff, then let the smoke out slowly. "That's illegal here in Washington," Schaefer goaded him. "You'll receive orders to return to England in 30 days' time," said Jones as he continued to puff on his cigarette. "You're an embarrassment here in Washington, as you will be in London. Of course, over there the tabloids have recreated you as a martyr of the brutal and inefficient American police and judicial systems. They like to think of this as D.C. confidential, more evidence of wholesale corruption and naivete in the States, which we both know in this case is complete crap." Schaefer sneered. "How dare you come in here and talk to me like this, Jones? I was framed for a heinous crime I didn't commit. I was acquitted by an American jury. Have you forgotten that?" Jones frowned and stared him down. "Only because crucial evidence wasn't allowed in the trial. The blood on your trousers? That poor woman's blood in the bathroom drain at your mistress's?" He blew smoke out the side of his mouth. "We know everything, you pathetic fool. We know you're a stone-cold killing freak, so you'll go back to London and stay there until we catch you at something, which we will, Schaefer. We'll make something up if we have to. I feel sick to my stomach just being in the same room with you. Legally, you've escaped punishment this time, but we're watching you so very closely now. We will get you somewhere, and someday soon." Schaefer looked amused. He couldn't hold back a smile. He knew he shouldn't, but he couldn't resist the play. "You can try, you insufferable sanctimonious shit. You can certainly try, but get in line. And now, if you please, I have work to do." Andrew Jones shook his head. "Well, actually, you don't have any work to do, Schaefer. But I am happy to leave. The stench in here is absolutely overpowering. When was the last time you bathed?" He laughed contemptuously. "Christ, you've completely lost it."
That afternoon I met with Jones and 3 of his agents at the Willard Hotel near the White House. I had called the meeting. Sampson was there, too. "I believe he's crazy," Jones said of Schaefer. "He smells like a commoded boot camp. He's definitely going down for the count. What's your take on his mental state?" I knew Jeffrey Schaefer inside and out by now. I had read about his family, his brothers, his long-suffering mother, his domineering father. Their travels from military base to military base until he was 12. Here's what I think. It started with a serious bipolar disorder, what used to be called manic depression. He had it when he was a kid. Now he's strung out on pharmaceutical drugs, Xanax, Benadryl, Haldol, Ativan, Valium, Librium, several others. It's quite a cocktail. Available from local doctors for the right price. I'm surprised he can function at all. But he survives. He doesn't go down. He always wins. I told Jeff he has to leave Washington. I don't think he'll take it, Jones asked me. I swear his office smelled as if a dead body had been festering there for a couple of days. Actually, his disorder can involve an accompanying odor. But it's usually steely, like metal, very pungent. Sticks to your nostrils. He probably isn't bathing, but his instincts for playing the game, for winning and surviving, are amazing. He won't stop. What's happening with the other players? Sampson inquired. The so-called horsemen. They claim that the game is over, and that it was only a fantasy game for them, Jones told him. Oliver Highsmith stays in touch. Mostly to keep tabs on us, I'm sure. He's actually a scary bastard in his own right. Says he's saddened by the murder of Detective Hampton. He's still not 100% sure that Schaefer is the killer. Urges me to keep my mind open on that one. Is your mind open on it? I asked, looking around the room at the others. Jones didn't hesitate. I have no doubt that Jeffrey Schaefer is a multiple murderer. We've seen enough and heard enough from you. He is quite possibly a homicidal maniac beyond anything we've ever known. And I also have no doubt that eventually he's going down. I nodded my head. I agree with everything you just said, but especially the homicidal maniac part.
Schaefer was talking to himself again that night. He couldn't help it, and the more he tried to stop, the worse it became. The more he fretted, the more he talked to himself. They can all bugger off, Jones, Cross, Lucy, and the kids, Boo Cassidy, the other spineless players. Screw them all. There was a reason behind the Four Horsemen. It wasn't just a game. There was more to it than simple horseplay. The house at Kalorama was empty, much too quiet at night. It was huge and ridiculous as only an American house can be. The original architectural detail, the double living room, the 6 fireplaces, the long-ago dead flowers from Astor Florist, the unread books in gold and brown leather bindings, Lucy's Marmite. It was driving him up the 12-foot-high walls. He spent the next hour or so trying to convince himself that he wasn't crazy. More specifically, that he wasn't an addict. Recently he'd added another doctor in Maryland to his sources for the drugs. Unfortunately, the illegal prescriptions cost him a fortune. He couldn't keep it up forever. The lithium and Haldol were to control his mood swings, which were very real. The Thorazine was for acute anxiety, which was fucking bloody real as well. The Narcan had also been prescribed for his mood swings. The multiple injections of Loradol were for something else. Some pain from he couldn't remember when. He knew there were good reasons, too, for the Xanax, the Compazine, the Benadryl. Lucy had already fled home to London, and she'd taken the traitorous children with her. They left exactly 1 week after the trial ended. Her father was the real cause. He'd come to Washington and spoken to Lucy for less than an hour, and she'd packed up and left like the goody two-shoes she'd always been. Before she departed, Lucy had the nerve to tell Schaefer she stood by him for the sake of the children and her father. But now her duty was over. She didn't believe that he was a murderer, as her father did, but she knew he was an adulterer, and that she couldn't take for 1 moment longer. God, how he despised his little wifey. Before Lucy left, he made it clear to her that the real reason she'd performed her duty was so he wouldn't reveal her unsavory drug habit to the press, which he would have done and still might do anyway. At 11 o'clock, he had to go out for a drive, his nightly constitutional. He was feeling unbearably jittery and claustrophobic. He wondered if he could control himself for another night, another minute. His skin was crawling and he had dozens of irritating little ticks. He couldn't stop tapping his goddamn foot. The dice were burning a bloody hole in his trouser pocket. His mind was racing in a dozen haphazard directions, all of them very bad. He wanted to, needed to, kill somebody. It had been this way with him for a long time, and that had been his dirty little secret. The other horsemen knew the story. They even knew how it had begun. Schaefer had been a decent English soldier, but ultimately too ambitious to remain in the army. He had transferred into MI6 with the help of Lucy's father. He thought there would be more room for advancement in MI6. His first posting was Bangkok, which was where he met James Whitehead, George Bayer, and eventually Oliver Highsmith. Whitehead and Bayer spent several weeks working on Schaefer, recruiting him for a specialized job. He would be an assassin, their own personal hitman for the worst sort of wet work. Over the next 2 years he did 3 sanctions in Asia, and found that he truly loved the feeling of power that killing gave him. Oliver Highsmith, who ran both Bayer and Whitehead from London, once told him to depersonalize the act, to think of it as a game, and that was what he did. He had never stopped being an assassin. Schaefer turned on the CD in the Jag, loud, to drown out the multiple voices raging in his head. The old-age home rockers Jimmy Page and Robert Plant began a duet inside the cockpit of his car. He backed out of the drive and headed down Tracy Place. He gunned the car and had it up close to 60 in the block between his house and 24th Street. Red lights flashed on the side of 24th Street. Schaefer cursed as a D.C. police patrol car eased down the street towards him. God damn it! He pulled the Jag over to the curb and waited. His brain was screaming. "Arseholes, bloody impertinent arseholes, and you're an arsehole too," he told himself in a loud whisper. "Show some self-control, Jeff. Get yourself under control. Shape up, right now." The Metro patrol car pulled up beside him, almost door to door. He could see 2 cops lurking inside. One of them got out slowly and walked over to the Jag's driver's side window. The cop swaggered like a hot-shit all-American cinema hero. Schaefer wanted to blow him away. Knew he could do it. He had a hot semi-automatic under the seat. He touched the grip, and God, it felt good. "License and registration, sir," the cop said, looking unbearably smug. A distorted voice inside Schaefer's head screeched, "Shoot him now! It will blow everyone's mind if you kill another policeman." He handed over the requested identification, though, and managed a wanker's sheepish grin. "We're out of Pampers at home. Trip to the 7-Eleven was in order. I know I was going too fast, and I'm sorry, officer. Blame it on baby brain. You have any kids?" The patrolman didn't say a word. Not an ounce of civility in the prick. He wrote out a speeding ticket, took his sweet time about it. "There you go, Mr. Schaefer." The patrol officer handed him the speeding ticket and said, "Oh, and by the way, we're watching you, shithead. We're all over you, man. You didn't get away with murdering Patsy Hampton. You just think you did." A set of car lights blinked on and off on the side street where the patrol car had been sitting a few moments earlier. Schaefer stared, squinted back into the darkness. He recognized the car. A black Porsche. Cross was there, watching. Alex Cross wouldn't go away.
Andrew Jones sat next to me in the quiet, semi-darkened cockpit of the Porsche. We'd been working closely together for almost 2 weeks. Jones and the security service were intent on stopping Schaefer before he committed another murder. They were also tracking War, Famine, and Conqueror. Jones and Sandy Greenberg from Interpol had helped to get the other 3 horsemen under surveillance. The net being cast was large as the catch could be, if we succeeded.
The game had never really ended, but it had changed tremendously since the trial in Washington. It was 5:30 in the evening in London, and Conqueror was waiting at his computer. He was both anxious and feverishly excited about what was happening. The 4 horsemen was starting up again. It was 1:30 a.m. in Manila, in the Philippines. Famine was ready for a message, and a new beginning to the game he loved. and war awaited news of the Four Horsemen. At his large house on the island of Jamaica, he too was obsessed with how it would end and whether he would be the winner. It was 12